Let's talk about a habit that is so common, so deeply familiar, but also incredibly frustrating. It's this broken loop that so many of us get stuck in, and you know what? The most interesting part isn't the kid's behavior, it's ours.
Okay, so picture the scene. It's morning, the clock is ticking, you're trying to get out the door, but your child is just, well, they're in another universe, still in their pajamas, completely unaware of the rush. Sound familiar? Yeah, I thought so. So you start out nice and calm. You're being the patient, reasonable adult. You say simply, get dressed. And what happens? Absolutely nothing. Okay, round two. You try again. But notice that little shift? The voice is just a bit sharper now. The patience is still technically there, but you can feel it starting to wear thin. By the third time, it's not even a request anymore, is it? It's turned into this statement of fact, and the tone is all about your own frustration building up. And then you hit the fifth time, and something just snaps. Your voice is completely different. It's not about clear communication anymore. It's about creating enough tension to force a reaction. And look, the child finally starts moving, but not because they listened. It's because the feeling in the room just got way too uncomfortable. Now, our first instinct is always to focus on the child. Are they being defiant? Are they just zoned out? But what if we're looking at the wrong person? The most puzzling, the most irrational behavior in this whole scene is coming from the adult. And that leads us to the real heart of the issue. I mean, think about it. If you were at work and a button was broken, you wouldn't just stand there pushing it over and over again, expecting a different result. So why on earth do we do it at home? Why do we keep using a tactic we already know is failing? Well, it turns out the answer is pretty fascinating. This whole habit, it's not really about communicating at all. It's actually all about avoidance. Let's dig into what's really happening just below the surface. So, repetition is kind of like a cheap form of effort. It gives us the illusion that we're taking action, that we're doing the parenting thing. But what we're really doing is stalling. We're trying to put off the harder, more uncomfortable moment of actually intervening and following through. And here's that gap between what we tell ourselves and what's really going on. We think, I'm being patient, when actually, we're just avoiding conflict. We feel like, I'm trying my best. But in reality, we're hiding inside our good intentions. We're substituting words for actual real leadership. You can almost hear the silent monologue happening in our heads, right? The second reminder is you performing patience. See, I'm still calm. The third one is a plea. Come on, please don't make me have to get involved here. The fourth is a justification for what's coming next. And the fifth? Well, that's just the sound of your patience completely collapsing. Now, this habit isn't just frustrating in the moment. It has a real hidden cost, and it's a big one. It slowly, quietly changes the kind of parent you are. Here's the kicker. We think we're training our kids to listen by repeating ourselves, but we're not. The person who is truly being conditioned in this whole exchange is you. You're training yourself. And this is how it works. It's a cycle. You give an instruction, but then there's no follow-through. And in that little gap, you are teaching yourself subconsciously that your words don't really need to be backed up. So to get a result, what does your brain do? It starts borrowing authority from somewhere else, from anger, from a sharp tone, from frustration. And over time, your calm, normal voice starts to mean absolutely nothing. And that's the tragic trade-off, isn't it? You win the immediate task. The shoes get on, the toys get picked up, but you lose something so much bigger. You lose the actual weight and authority of your ordinary everyday voice. To really let this sink in, there is this incredibly powerful metaphor from the world of economics that just explains this whole thing perfectly. It's one of those ideas that once you hear it, you can't unhear it. That's it. 2 words. Repetition is inflation. Think about it. When you create too much of something, it loses its value. Every time you repeat yourself, you are literally devaluing the currency of your own words. The parallel here is just so clear. When a government prints way too much money, that currency becomes worthless. When a parent repeats way too many commands, their words lose all their weight. They just become background noise. And this is the end result. Your guidance, your words, they become purely decorative. You're like a picture on the wall. You're there, you're visible, but you have no actual function. You are, for all intents and purposes, being ignored. So, when all is said and done, what's the real takeaway? It's this final, pretty challenging thought. The most dangerous sound in a home isn't the shouting.
The real danger is the sound of a calm voice that's been repeated so many times that it has lost all its gravity and means nothing at all.
It's the one that just bounces around the house. That feeling of complete frustration when a really simple request seems to just go into a black hole. Hey, can you put on your shoes? Time to clean up your toys. Dinner's ready. And you just get nothing. What is going on there?
Okay, here's the big twist. What if the problem isn't their defiance? What if this has nothing to do with them being disrespectful or having a bad attitude? What if the real answer is actually in the system that, well, you've accidentally built?
So let's start with a huge shift in how we look at this. We've got to stop seeing this thing as a battle of wills, me versus them, and instead start seeing it as a system that has an unbelievably accurate sensor right in the middle of it. And you guessed it, that sensor is your child.
Think about it like this. Kids are absolute masters at mapping patterns. They are brutally honest responders to whatever environment they find themselves in. They don't just hear the words you say. They are analyzing the entire system, your tone, your body language, and most importantly, what actually happens after you speak. So here's how it usually plays out in real life, right? You ask them to do something. Then you ask again, maybe this time a little louder. Then you give the final warning. So what does your child just learn from this? They've learned that the first, second, maybe even third request, they're just suggestions, they're warm-ups. They've figured out, very rationally, to just wait for the real signal that you mean business. And this, right here, is the most important part. When they ignore that first request, it is not a personal insult. They are not trying to disrespect you. They are just acting on the data that you've been giving them all along. They have learned the unspoken rules of the game you've created. This is the trap so many of us fall into. The second you make it about their bad attitude or their defiance, you've just declared a war over their character, and that is a war you can't win. You end up lecturing, you start punishing, you try bargaining, and all it does is make the power struggle worse and leave everyone feeling awful. So, if it's not a war, what is it? Well, this brings us to another huge misunderstanding. The real difference between discipline and just plain old harshness. We tend to mix up emotional intensity with real authority. But believe me, they are not the same thing at all. See, harshness is all emotion. It's totally unpredictable. It's that moment you snap because you're stressed out, but then you let things slide when you're feeling good or just too tired to care. Discipline, though, that's structure. It's consistent. It holds firm, which creates a stable, predictable world that your child can actually learn to navigate. Here's another really useful way to think about this. Your words. They're like a currency. And just like money, for them to have any value, they have to be backed by something real. Otherwise, they're just worthless paper. So what's the backing? It's not yelling. It's not threats. It's actually much simpler. It is the alignment of your speech with reality. It's consistent follow-through. It's that quiet confidence that comes from knowing that when you say something, it is actually connected to an action. And that's the goal. That's it right there. The goal isn't to be louder, it's to be clearer. It's for your quiet, calm first request to carry all the weight it needs. You say it once, and you mean it. Okay, so let's say you're on board. You're ready to make a change. I have to warn you, the hardest part isn't what you have to start doing. The hardest part is what you have to stop doing. It's about learning to tolerate a new and honestly pretty uncomfortable silence. When you make that one quiet request, and then you stop talking, there's going to be a void. This empty, kind of awkward space where all the nagging and reminding used to be. Every single instinct you have is going to scream at you to fill that space with more words, to explain, to justify, to remind them. You have to resist that. You just have to tolerate the silence.
Because in that silence, the system is going to test you. Your child is going to push those old boundaries because remember, they're a sensor. They need to know if this new map you've laid out is for real or if it's just a temporary glitch. Now, this phase, it's going to look and feel like total failure. It will be messy, but it is not failure. It's the critical, wobbly moment of transition.
And you know what? This is where most people give up. That discomfort of restructuring the system is just too much. They panic and they go right back to flooding the system with that devalued currency. More words, more warnings, more emotional threats. And just like that, the old broken pattern wins again. So what this all means is that this isn't really about finding some magic 3-step trick to make your kids listen. It's about a much, much deeper shift. It's about changing the fundamental question that we're asking ourselves as parents. I want you to really sit with this question for a second. How many times a day do you say something like, "If you don't stop that right now, we are leaving the park," when you have absolutely no intention of leaving? Or, "This is the last time I'm telling you," when both you and your child know very well it isn't? Because every single time you make one of those empty threats, you are actively teaching your child that your calm, rational voice can be safely ignored. You're literally training them to wait for the explosion of emotion to know that you're finally serious. Think of your words, your real, meaningful words, as the gravity that kind of holds your home together. When that's true, then constant repetition, all that nagging and reminding, that's the force that weakens the gravity, creating chaos and uncertainty for everybody. So let's just agree to stop asking that old, frustrating question. The goal is not, how do I make them listen? The new question, the one that's actually productive, is this: how do I rebuild the system so that my voice once again has weight and meaning? Because ultimately, this isn't about power, and it's not about domination, it's about restoration. It's about becoming that reliable, consistent, stable center that a family really needs to thrive. So the question I want to leave you with is this: how do you become the anchor, instead of just becoming another voice lost in the storm? Now that's the real work.